Welcome to the Powered by Age-Friendly City Zoomcast reality-style podcast.
We are movers and shakers, shaking up the old notion of silent, helpless, invisible seniors.
This is a new series of podcasts funded by the City of Vancouver and the 411 Senior Center Society.
As PBA AFC ambassadors, we
raise awareness,
share our original stories and poems,
inform, advocate, and involve seniors in discussing important social issues.
In short, these podcasts will help us,
you, in creating an age-friendly city for Vancouver today,
tomorrow the world.
You can hear us everywhere podcasts are heard. Welcome to Season 3 of Powered by Age Canada's longest-running senior-led podcast, where participants don't just listen, but get involved in inviting guests and being presenters. I'm Charlotte Sister C. Farrell, your host. This is our third week of honoring Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month with another important inclusion, the heritage contributions and concerns of people of Southeast Asian descent. Shibani Gokhale, a multi-platform news producer, video journalist, and lawyer, is going to be our special guest today and raise our awareness and share some calls to action. But first, our tech and training associate, Jesse Winslaw, is going to give us our land acknowledgement and sponsor announcement.
Thanks, Charlotte. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we are recording on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Coquitlam, Tsleil-Waututh, and others, depending where we're located, that this land was never formally transferred or given over, and that we are grateful to be able to be here doing what we are on this land. Also let you know that the Powered by Age podcast is sponsored by the Government of Canada Information and Referral Services New Horizons for Seniors program and the 411 Senior Center Society.
Thank you,
Charlotte.
And now what we usually do, we introduce the people that have come on at the beginning. As other people come on, we don't have them introduce themselves. And followed by that, Nancy is going to be our facilitator today. Nancy is one of our program assistants and mentors, and she will introduce our special guest. So we will start with Gail.
Did you say Neil?
Maybe. I said Gail, but
Gail.
Maybe
Gail.
she thought I said
Gail.
Neil.
Oh my gosh, I'm right next to you, Charlotte.
It just for the hell of it, it's both ends the same sound.
Yeah, it does. And I went, who's she called? My name's Gail Harwood, and I'm from Ontario, but lived here for many years. Also, I lived overseas in 2 countries in Africa, working and living. And that taught me a lot. I traveled to Asia, got back to Canada, and I don't know my country, so I proceeded to get on the train. And I did that 3 times across, so it was fabulous. And I'm a writer, and as soon as I get this radiation out of the way, I'm going to finally work on the last chapters of my book and ship it off to an agent in the UK. And what else? Oh yeah, I'm an educator. I'm retired from the school board, and I still teach students. I really love it. I really love my students.
All right, thank you. Chris?
I'm Chris Morrissey, and I don't know how I can follow that, Gail. I did cross Canada once when I was about 8.
Wow.
By train after we arrived in Halifax from England. And I've been back to Halifax once, but not traveling by train across the country. Anyway, I live in East Van, and I participate at Britannia Community Centre, which, like most community centres, has been closed. But I still participate in Quirky, the Queer Imaging and Writing Collective for Elders, which we meet online every week. And we endeavor to write and to read and to critique the things that we write. So that's me.
Neil?
Neil, I am a poet, published author, thanks to my bank account. And I'm doing well, and I've just started my second book, and it's to be called Cave Paintings. So, and cave paintings, poetry, and other short stories. So,
And we're looking forward to that.
and by the way, I have a new webpage too, which from which you can purchase my book of poetry called From the Other Side, which is around here somewhere.
Okay, Leslie.
Yes, I'm Leslie Hebert, and I live in New Westminster. I have never been across Canada all the way. I flew across Canada from the UK to Vancouver. The furthest I've been eastward from here is actually Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, where I have in-laws. So maybe one day I'll get the rest of the way across.
I have to make a correction. I got as far as the Maritimes. Newfoundland is a trip unto itself.
I heard, yeah.
Yes. And you all had a fire last night in Westminster.
Yeah, the Heritage Grill, which was, Neil knows the Heritage quite well.
Oh, that's where we performed.
Yeah, that's right. You do too, Charlotte. That's where we had our Poetic Justice every Sunday afternoon. A big sponsor of the arts and a sponsor of the community, and, very involved in the Gay Pride Parade and a whole bunch of different things. So it's a real loss to the community. So we're just hoping that the owner can rebuild. Yeah.
So it's going to be rebuilt, of course, huh?
We're hoping, yeah.
This just takes time.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
Anne?
Hi, I'm Ann Drozd. And I guess I can say when we're talking about cross Canada, I've worked in every province in Canada except for the north. Mm-hmm. But I've spent time in all of them, sometimes more and sometimes less. I lived in Ontario before I came out here to the west, and then I lived on Gabriola for 14 years before I came to Nanaimo. So now I'm firmly rooted in Nanaimo.
Well, I have in common with you. I lived originally landed in Ontario and lived in Toronto, worked in public health promotion for 20 years. So I'm here in Vancouver too now.
Yep.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Sinclair, and I live on beautiful Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And I've lived in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and traveled when I was a kid. We went on a 6-week camping trip across Canada and went as far as Ontario. I have a lot of fond memories of that. It's just beautiful, beautiful experience. So, yeah, very, very fortunate to be living here in Canada.
Yeah.
And now Nancy's going, let's see, Brian, are you there in the corner? That their phone is muted. Mariko and Brian are there at the 411 Center. You can see a window of our new building. We're going to be able to start going into the building, maybe before July 1st.
Wow, that's so cool.
Okay. So Nancy, you can introduce our guest.
I'm so excited, so honored. So our guest today is Shibani Gokhale. She's a video journalist based in Vancouver, Canada. She primarily works as an associate editor for Yahoo News Canada and is also a video contributor to the Daily Hive Vancouver, CBC Creator Network, and The Quint. She has a master's in journalism degree from Columbia University. She's previously worked as a digital journalist at Attention in Los Angeles. And she can also be found on Instagram, and we will send that information out to you later. And we are just absolutely delighted to have her with us today as we celebrate and recognize Asian Heritage Month and she's going to bring some topics of discussion to the table for us to enlighten ourselves, expand our awareness, find out what we can do to make things a much more positive experience for everybody. So please welcome Shibani.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So nice to hear everyone's bios, and it's so cool to hear that you've all, lived in different provinces and you've traveled so much through Canada. I was in Canada when I was a kid because my dad's a Canadian citizen, so I was in Toronto for a while. And then I went to India to be with my mom, who's a doctor over there. So she's like on the front lines right now fighting COVID. And then I went to law school in India, and then I did my master's in the US, worked there for a little while. And then I finally decided, because, my dad was like, you have to go back to Canada. So I finally decided to come back to Canada and chose Vancouver just because, the beach and stuff.
How long have you been back in Vancouver, Shibani?
It's been over a year now. So, and I was with Yahoo even a year before I started here. So it's, that was the main reason that I was moving to Canada, is that I was already working for Yahoo Canada. So it made more sense to just make the move happen.
Oh, gosh. And you mentioned your mom working the front line there, hey? In India?
Yeah, she's a doctor in India. Yeah. So she got COVID. She was even admitted, but, she's a formidable woman. So she's back fighting it again. Yeah.
So is she, what part of India is that? I've been in India for a few months. So.
It's in Pune, which is like 3 hours away from Mumbai.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's really beautiful. It's a really pretty city.
Well, Pune, yeah, and that's a university town, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It used to be called the Oxford of the East. That's what they used to call. I went to law school there actually in Pune.
Oh yeah, an old colleague of mine, Harry Ockel from Mauritius, he studied in Pune.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Pune University is huge and it's really well known.
Yeah. Shibani, before I leave you, which beach do you like?
Oh, well, we live 5 minutes away from Kitsilano Beach, so I have to say Kits because it's so close. So we go there very often.
I'm in the same hood.
Really? You're in Kits?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, we should plan to meet once, COVID settles down.
We're going to have a coffee over at the boathouse, eh?
Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you. So Shibani, we're really very honored and very excited to have you spend time with us today to, like I said earlier, expand our awareness about Asian Heritage Month. And so I'm just going to ask you to start with, if perhaps your first inspiration that you'd like to share with us, just like I say, from a perspective of what's occurring, what it is that we can benefit from in terms of learning and understanding. I know when we had previous discussions, we had about 2 or 3 topics in particular that were really mainstay that are important for us to bring up to focus. But I'd just like you to start off with whatever feels, you feel inspired to share.
One thing is, of course, because of COVID, I feel like Asian people here are almost under attack right now because that's the first thing that people think is, oh, COVID started in China. It's automatically the fault of all Asian people. And then, they're being targeted with a lot of racist attacks. One figure, it's a really damning figure that people should keep in mind is that hate crimes against Asians went up 717% in just Vancouver in the last year alone. That's it, just Vancouver. And over 1,100 people, maybe more now because this research was done a month ago, across Canada reported being subjected to racist attacks, all Asian people. And it's really heartbreaking. There are also videos, that have gone viral of people being targeted, of being told, go back to your country, you brought COVID. There are reports of people spitting on Asians on the street or coughing on them to say sort of well, you gave me COVID, so I'm going to spit on you, you deserve all of these germs. And I think one really important thing for everyone to keep in mind is that we cannot attribute the fault of the government to the people here. For example, if you want to blame the government of China, then it's not the fault of the Chinese people who are living in Canada. They didn't do anything. Neither is it the fault of regular Chinese citizens in China. It's the fault of the government. It's almost like saying, well, if you don't like Trump, all Americans are bad. Or if you don't like Trudeau, then all Canadians are bad. But that's not how it works. It's the fault of the government and it cannot be and the regular people cannot be targeted for this, especially those that have never even been to China. There's so many Asian immigrants who've never even been to their home countries. Like they're fully assimilated in North American culture. So for them being told, go back to your country is sort of, it's so hurtful to feel like you grow up here, you identify Canada as your home country, you think that there's no other country greater than Canada, and then to be told that, you don't deserve to be here. It's a really hurtful experience for anyone to go through. And I think that's one thing that, definitely helps is to remember that it's not the fault of the people if the government messed something up. So that's one statistic that I definitely, want to talk about, the 717%.
That's a shocking statistic.
Yeah.
Shocking. And you said just in Vancouver alone, here, 717%. I mean, that's unimaginable.
No, it's insane. It just makes me think how many people are going through it. And, there's this misconception also that COVID was the reason that people are being subjected to attacks. But that's not really true. Like Asian people have always been subjected to some sort of racism. Asian women are so often sexualized. And, people say that racism and sexualization is separate, but it's really not. They're being sexualized because of their race. It may not be an overt form of racism in the sense that you're not hitting them or killing them, but it's still racism in some form. Or, in Atlanta, the shooting that happened, that guy, he said he was a sex addict and he shot the women to reduce temptation. So definitely racism and sexualization are connected. And that's something that Asian women have been facing for years.
And when you mentioned earlier about, it's not the fault of the citizens, it's not the fault of the people themselves, it's the government. So what is your take in terms of what our government is doing to plead ignorance to that? Like, what is their responsibility to step up to the plate so that we can, eradicate these misconceptions?
Well, one thing, I think legislation is really useful. Very recently, Biden passed an anti-Asian hate crime law. It doesn't do anything directly, right? All of these are still crimes. But for example, spitting on someone, it may or may not be considered a crime in court. Like, it's very easy to argue. But if we just come up with a new law that says that no, spitting on people, especially during a pandemic, taking our mask off, coughing on people are all crimes, then I think it would help Asian people, because the biggest attack that Asian people are suffering right now is people coughing and spitting on them. And I think if we can somehow legalize that, have it codified into a law, then I think they would have grounds to go to court to say that, look, this guy coughed on me. And right now, that's almost like a death sentence. Because what if I get COVID? What if I die? So then maybe we can codify that.
I wonder if there's something in the criminal code, because I just heard a policeman on CBC News when that woman was spat at. He said, spitting on people is considered assault.
Yeah, spitting is, coughing isn't. And I think coughing is something that definitely should be. Obviously, because like coughing, before COVID wasn't that big of a deal, but now, of course it is.
Well, the point is that you have to look at intent.
Of course, yes, of course, yeah. If you cough on someone by mistake, it's not necessarily, you should have to go to jail for that.
And you're all embarrassed, but if you cough on people in a hateful manner, that's another story.
Yes. And another great advice I have is if you see an Asian person being attacked, then you should definitely try and step up. Don't get aggressive. Absolutely. Don't put your own life in danger. Never. That's not good. But, I feel like as Canadian citizens or as white people, I feel like there's the attacker might listen to a white person more than they would an Asian person, which, is sad, but it is what it is. And that is something that would help. Or if the easiest thing to do is just take your phone out and record them. So at least the police can later identify who the perpetrators were. So stuff like this is also a good way to combat attacks on the street.
So I had a question too for you, Shibani. You'd mentioned that in some cases, people don't necessarily realize that individuals and citizens from India and Pakistan are also considered Asian. So there's some misconception. Could you speak to that a little bit for us, please?
For sure. I feel like Indians, it happens to me sometimes if I say I'm Asian, people are like, you're not Asian. I'm like, no, but I am. I'm Indian. And India is still an Asia. So we're technically all Asians. We are often referred to as South Asians. But one thing, to keep in mind is that COVID right now is escalating in India. It's at one of the I think the worst outbreak in the entire world is happening in India right now. People are dying every day. The variant, that's the B171 variant. That's the really mutant variant that's killing people essentially started in India first. And people here are calling it the Indian variant, which is now going to give rise to an increase in hate crimes against Indians. And that is something to keep in mind, that we're still all Asians. And, China is our neighbor. Like India and China, we share a border. So if something happens in China, then India is like the first place that might suffer because of it. Like if a virus starts in China, then India is automatically the first country that will suffer, because there's just so much travel that happens between China and India. So I do think that India or Pakistan or Bangladesh should not be left out of the conversation when we talk about hate crimes against Asians, because India is going through a lot of the same things.
Should those countries also be included in talking about the contributions to Canada?
Oh, for sure. I feel like the maximum number of immigrants are from India, Pakistan, China. And of course, like they've done so much. Like right now, we have Jagmeet Singh, who's like the NDP leader in Burnaby, I think. And he, is of Indian origin. So stuff like that. I do think that Indians are doing really well in Canada. They've contributed greatly to Canada's economy, to Canada's politics. So definitely, I think all of Asia should be considered as like a good contributor to Canada in general.
I would like to add something, and that is that without embracing the other cultures that exist, not only in our country, but there's all kinds of, we shortchange ourselves. Like the Bhagavad Gita is the most beautiful, I can quote you from the Gita because it is such a beautiful, beautiful book. And the same Mariko, O Genki desu ka? It's like the Japanese have a beautiful culture, and I happen to share my life with a Chinese lady, and so I speak reasonably good, a little bit of Chinese.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
But that's what our government should be suggesting, is that these other cultures and these other ideas really make up the Canadian culture and idea, because we're all immigrants. We're all immigrants in some way, shape, or my mother, Canadian born, but in St. Catharines, but my father from Derbyshire, England, and my grandfather from Wicklow in Ireland. And, it's like, that is what bothers me, is that if we try and exclude other cultures, we leave out a part of what it is to be a human being. And I am the ritual and the worship, the medicine and the mantra. I am the butter burned in the fire is the most beautiful description of God that I've ever read anywhere.
You have such a nice way with words. I really like it.
Yeah, he's Neil's a poet.
My a friend of mine, a Sikh friend of mine, his family got to Canada 5 years before my family got to Canada from Ukraine. So give me a break. A lot of Asian people I see on the street have been here for generations.
Yeah. Yeah, Canada is their home. Like they don't know life outside almost. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I know we're talking about all cultures are valid, and one of the reasons that Canada and across the country we have different months dedicated to different ethnicities or world regions is just so that people can have a special time to give more information that's not commonly or often heard. So I think Shibani has a particular appeal related to India that she wanted to make, and something else to share.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's really important to acknowledge people. Like we have Mother's Day, we have Father's Day. It's important to have those so that, you take a day out of your life to sort of acknowledge your mom, acknowledge your dad. I think it's also important to have a day where you acknowledge ethnicities, just because they're not considered to be the main ethnicities, or they're the minority. Sometimes they get overlooked. So I do think it's really important in this month. And in this month, you can do things like, for example, because it's like Asian Heritage Month, you can do things like, maybe you have sushi and you go to a local Japanese-owned restaurant here, or you go to a Asian grocery store. You'll try boba tea. You'll try something from the Asian culture that you've never tried. Maybe you can reach out to an Asian person, try to to become friends with them, just like get to know how their life is. Most people are not offended if you ask questions. Of course, you should ask them if they're open to, talking or answering your questions. But if they are, then I think it's a great way to sort of assimilate into the culture. I also think, with Asians and with immigrants in general, there's this sort of tendency to sort of stick together. Like people don't want to interact with other communities either. Like, for example, so many Indians I know, they don't want to interact with people outside of their own Indian communities. It's because there's like a fear of acceptance. Like they think that, oh, well, if I go and interact with a bunch of white people and they talk about things that I don't understand, like I'm going to feel left out. So I feel like if there is an Asian person in your group and you feel like they're not understanding all the references and trying and making sure that, bring them into the conversation. Like if you're talking about a show that maybe aired in Canada that an immigrant will not have watched, you can say that, this is a show that aired in the 80s and, this is what we're talking about. It can be annoying, I get that, but it's also a good way to include people into the fold and make them feel like, okay, I'm a part of this. Like I'm not just an outsider looking in. So that's something that also works with like immigrants and people of color in general.
It can be. I was just having that discussion with somebody in another group yesterday, and we were talking about that specific thing and the example actually we were talking about in spiritual communities or spiritual centers, churches and things, and wanting to make other people feel welcome. And they were talking about the benefit right now of being online through Zoom, and in some cases how conversations and people's relationships have become more intimate because we're more closely gathered. And as much as when we're in a physical space, everybody's there for the same reason, but there's a little bit of intimidation or perhaps lack of confidence. Sometimes you feel like a person might feel like they're intruding. They might not have the self-confidence to feel like, they don't want to interrupt, or they might be thinking in the back of their mind, well, who am I to go and to join in? They might not want me there. And I recall having that experience when I was in networking meetings years ago in different types of businesses. So I would go to something and go to an event, and there was an intimidation. As much as I'm very confident about a lot of things, I sometimes felt like I was being intrusive, or I was waiting for them to welcome me in because they seemed like they'd been there, forever. They knew what they were doing. I was missing part of the program or something. And so I think it maybe works on both sides. We might not be extending ourselves to welcome other people, not because we're afraid to, in a sense of being concerned that there's something different about them, but that we lack the confidence to feel that, do they really want to hear from me? So I don't know if you have any particular tips or, of different ways that we could look at that.
I think one easy way is to try and start a one-on-one conversation with someone who feels excluded, maybe, or that if you feel like someone's being excluded, like maybe just reach out to them personally, be like, hey, can we set a time aside to chat, talk to them, like ask them about their experiences. And maybe you can just ask them like, oh, if you're feeling like excluded, is there anything that I can do to help you feel like you're a part of the conversation? This is something that we at work really often, or at least used to back when I was in Los Angeles, because we had a lot of immigrants, a lot of people of color. We used to work together. It was like a hot pot. So we basically would set time aside and ask them like, hey, like, do you need something from us to bring you into the fold? Like, is there something you're not understanding? And how can we improve your experience? So that's definitely something that can be done, is to just initiate more one-on-one conversations.
That's fabulous.
I was going to ask, you have such a variety of journalism experiences, and you're doing something new with social media and video. Can you share with us, because we have a number of people within our group who are writers, what are some of the things that you do in using social media?
Well, I think one thing that you need to do, like I've been doing when I first started, when I studied journalism at Columbia University. When I studied journalism, we were more focused on traditional journalism, like print media, like newspapers and TV journalism, so news stations. But, even in the 1 year that I graduated, the scope of journalism had changed so much. So much of journalism had moved to Facebook, to Twitter, to Instagram. And I think I didn't get formal education in digital journalism. So we just sort of had to adapt, like learn, okay, this is how videos do well on Twitter. This is how videos do well on Facebook. So I think the best way to adapt is to just sort of keep using it. I have a fail fast mentality. So it's like, do something. If it fails, just restart, retry it in a different way. Don't repeat it. We call that fail fasting in in digital media. So we do that a lot. Like, okay, let's just put this video out and then we'll see if it does well. Let's publish this article. If it doesn't do well, we'll scrap it, we'll restart and do something else. And I think that's the best way with social media because it keeps changing. So, when I first started at Attention, we were focused on Facebook videos. And now that I'm working with Daily Hive Vancouver, we are focused on Instagram videos. So in just 2 years, the platform has changed so much. And the only way to adapt really is to keep using it. So it's to keep make Instagram accounts, keep posting something, figure out how it works, tinker with it a little bit. And that's the best way to stay on top of technology, I think.
What is Daily Hive for people who might not know?
You're reading my mind, Charlotte. I was just asking the same question.
So Daily Hive is a Vancouver-based media company. It's a startup and it's focused mostly on digital media. So they don't have newspapers, they don't have magazines, they have a website. I can send you a link to the website and it has a lot of younger perspectives. So basically 20 things to do in Vancouver this weekend. Go check out the Imagine Van Gogh Museum. This is where you can go buy the best butter chicken in Vancouver. So stuff like that. But we also do hard news. I made videos about Asian hate crimes, about Canada's vaccination rollout, about India's COVID-19 crisis. So it's a mix so that it tries to cater to all audiences. And it's the biggest on Instagram. I think Daily Hive does the most numbers on Instagram. And it's really cool, especially if you're based in BC. We do very specific BC related news. So with vaccinations, for example, then we would have an exact chart about how you can book your vaccines in BC, which pharmacies have the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. So Daily Hive is great if you like using technology, if you like using your phone and you want to get some news, you want to get some information, then Daily Hive is great for that.
How can people within our group who write or do things that might not, can anybody submit stuff to Daily Hive?
Yeah, so I think on their website there's this one email that has info@Daily Hive. So in there you can send in pitches, be hey, we have this idea, or you can be if you want, you could approach someone at Daily Hive. Maybe I can give you someone's email if someone wants to talk about it. And you can be we think that a column for senior citizens would do really well here. And then you can, sort of pitch that idea and work it out with the editor. That's how it happened for me. I just reached out to the editor on LinkedIn and I was hey, I have this idea for videos and I think that it would do well with you guys. So although I work for Yahoo, they were you know what? Yeah, let's try it out. And then that's how we started doing it with Daily Hive. I don't primarily work for Daily Hive. I'm employed at Yahoo. So that's where I do most of my work.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Shibani. The government in the last couple of years have been putting out these little heritage moments showcasing Asian immigration to Canada. And I wonder, how are they doing?
Well, I do think the Canadian government is doing a good job as far as immigrants are welcomed here. It's especially Trudeau, I feel he's quite open in general. He has more of a liberal attitude, especially Jagmeet. So in Vancouver or in BC, it's not that much of a problem because Jagmeet is, so welcoming and he's so open. And I think he tries to keep the liberal government in check too because he's always talking about discrimination. He's a really vocal supporter of all communities of color. So I do think that having someone like Jagmeet in the government has actually been super great, not just for Indians or for Asians, just for any person of color because he's so vocal about it. And I think that's important. Even if, NDP is not the biggest party in Canada right now, I think it is so important to have opposition that can at least keep countering or keep checking the government on their biases, I guess, or their prejudices, which I think Jagmeet does admirably well. And I feel Trudeau does try. I will say that. I do think that he wants to genuinely be welcoming to immigrants. And I do think that there is an effort there, which is, having lived in America, I can say for sure that I don't see that effort with the American government to welcome immigrants. With Canada, I feel there's an effort there. Whether or not it's executed properly, depends from province to province, but I do at least see an intention and an effort, which I really like. Another reason that, we decided to move to Canada, I just feel it's a more welcoming and they're just genuinely more interested in trying to do better.
Universal health care.
Yes, of course. That goes without saying. Yeah, goes without, especially after living in America, goes without saying.
Oh, yeah.
What about from a spiritual perspective? I know that a lot of weddings were canceled. Yesterday they said people can have weddings again. But how do you find tolerance towards religious practices from India within Vancouver, Canada?
I feel like there can be, but again, like Indians, for example, have settled so much into Surrey. So many Indians live in Surrey, like they live in their own bubble, so they're not really subjected to too much victimization over this. But I do think that there is a lot of something that we're talking about a lot lately is cultural appropriation. So what's okay and what's not okay for people to participate in when it comes to like Indian or Asian religion, especially like Japanese is one, they have their really own specific culture, similar to like how Indians have their own culture. So when is it okay for Canadians who are not Indians to wear like Indian outfits? So if you're going to a wedding, an Indian person's wedding, and then you wear an Indian outfit, that's totally fine. But if you wear an Indian outfit generally to walk on the street without being aware of the origins or without respecting the culture, then that's where it's problematic. So I think that there's like a mix. Some people do tend to make fun of like Indian weddings, like, oh, like what is this? How do you have a 7 days long wedding? Like it doesn't make any sense. We just have a 1 day wedding. And I feel like, again, it comes from the perspective of being open. And I think it comes from perspective of not being offended. So if like an Indian person, I think a couple of celebrities, they got in trouble because they were wearing the Indian bindis, which, are symbols of like religious married women in India. So even I wouldn't wear a bindi because I don't subscribe to that religious ideology myself. So I don't think it's right for me to be wearing it as a fashion statement. So, a lot of celebrities got called out for that. And I think those are things, and they got really defensive and they got really angry. And I think that's the problem. Like if you can do something, if it's a mistake, then just own up to it and don't repeat it. And I think that's what we need. Not just a welcoming attitude, but welcoming constructive criticism. So if like people of color say that, hey, this is really hurting us, don't do it, then just be open to it because you're not in their shoes. So you don't know what they're going through. So that's another advice that I would have.
Yeah. Do you think that education in the schools, et cetera, is useful? Some of the programming in schools is useful to fight against this. There's people are just so ignorant. It's just shocking what people say.
Oh, yes. I was going to bring that up. I think that the schooling system does need to improve while talking about other cultures. I think there should actually be a whole subject that discusses other cultures, because I have friends, Indian friends, who grew up being called curry munchers, or they grew up calling like curry girls, or like they're told that like you're darky, stuff like that. Or like I have Asian friends who've been called chinks and stuff like that. These are all slurs, and you shouldn't really call them these things. And I think that and these are kids, right? Where are they learning this from? Probably their parents, or it's like group mentality. They don't really know the hurt, but I have friends who've heard these things. They're still hurt by it because of something one silly boy said to them in 5th grade. Like I still have friends like who feel sad when they think of that incident. So I think schooling and talking about cultures, talking to kids when they're younger about the words that they use, the things they say to people of color, like students of color, I think would really, really help to not have kids grow up with like a victimized mentality. Because then what happens is if we get bullied in school, we grow up assuming that everyone's going to bully us. And that may not necessarily happen, but then it kind of creates like a barrier between, say, white people and between people of color, because like we grow up thinking that, oh, every single white person is going to bully me at some point. But that's not really true, right? But I think that happens because of school, because like you grow up hearing those things. So I do think that schooling is really, really important. And I wish that all students would stop bullying students of color, because it's incredibly damaging in the long run.
And that's something that has happened with Black people being made fun of about our hair, or people saying, as small children, is that color going to wash off? Living through a time where there were laws that, practices where people would drain the whole pool if a Black person or a person of color swam in that pool. But in this show is also going to be heard in the Speak Up, Listen Up, Act Upon. What can people do to get the schools to do things? Because the school, it doesn't just happen. What could parents or people do to have the schools begin to ask for, include this cultural education, cross-cultural education?
So, okay, I think one thing really, really helps, and it's an underrated way of changing things. It is is petitions. I think signing petitions is an underrated way of bringing about change, but it does bring about change. For example, if one mom says she is like a Black mother or an Indian mother, she feels like her child is being bullied. If she starts a petition, then for other white people who may not understand, to like listen to her, to sign the petition, to give support to the parents, like the parents of color who are trying to bring about change, I think that other parents need to support them. If parents of color are saying that, hey, my child is being bullied in school, then I think that other white parents need to listen to them and be like, you know what, I support you. Like, what policy change would you like in school? And I will stand by that. I will support you. And I think that will bring about change. Signing petitions, sending email to deans, saying stuff like, you can even threaten schools, right? Like if 20 parents say that we will take the child out of your school if you do not implement these changes, that's a big threat. Like schools will likely at some point have to implement that change because they don't want to lose their kids. They don't want to lose all the fees that they're getting. So that's something that can be done, is just like reaching out to deans. Another way is social media. You know, if you see something bad happen, expose them. You know, there were lots of incidences in America where Black girls, you know, they little girls, you know, who were made fun of because of their braids or because of their hair. And the mothers, they basically shamed the people. They posted photos on Instagram. They posted photos on Twitter, on Facebook. They shamed the school. They shamed the perpetrators. And it went so viral that the school had to issue apologies, and the school had to, you know, institute a whole class. So I think that is something that helps, is using social media and signing petitions.
You had, I think you were made mention in Yahoo in one of your videos about things people could do to support India right now. Are there things to send or to support or to help with the healthcare? I mean, there's just a number of things, but I think you had some specific suggestions of what people could do.
Well, yeah, India is going through, you know, a tremendous crisis right now, tremendous. And I think one way that we need to bring about change is if anyone has contacts at the government, then they should reach out to their representatives, tell them that, hey, like Canada needs to beef up the aid that it's sending to India. Like Canada did, you know, they did send, I think, $2 million to Canadian Red Cross, which went to Indian Red Cross. And they have also sent oxygen and ventilators. But, you know, Canada is such a large Indian population, and they all have relatives back home. So I think that Canada could be doing a little more, considering that so much of their population is Indian or is South Asian. So that's one thing that you can do, is definitely, you know, if you have any contacts with the government, reaching out to them. Another is just donating if it's possible. You know, if you have the financial and the mental bandwidth, then donating, like find verified, which, you know, I have a list of verified organizations. Again, on my Daily Hive article, I can send that if anyone's interested. Sending donations, and these are all like verified on the ground organizations, you know, who are running across, like doing things for people right now. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I think another way is to amplify. For example, there is a slight issue with freedom of speech and freedom of press in India, right? The government has been tamping down on activists and on journalists who are trying to create awareness about ground situation, because they don't want it to get out that India is in such a bad state. So if you see something, then maybe sharing it on Twitter, sharing it on Facebook, that can help generate awareness. People who may not have even heard about the problem might be like, you know what, I should donate. And then that might bring about $10 more, which another thing to consider is the conversion rate. You know, in India, the conversion rate, $1 is equal to like 60 rupees, which in India is much, much higher in terms of value for what you can buy, as opposed to what you can buy with $1 here. So that's another something to keep in mind. If you feel like, oh, I'm just donating $10, like what difference is that going to make? But it actually might make a big difference to someone in India. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
I think there's a connection. Yesterday, many of us were happy to hear the announcements from BC government about the 80% of older people have been immunized, 60% of people in their 50s have been immunized. And the immunizations came from India. At the beginning, the rate was so low, they shipped immunization all over the world and now don't have enough for the people here. So I think advocating for, as you said, sending money, advocating that the government send more supplies. In some places, there are case lots of immunization material that is sitting and about to go bad, both in the United States and in Canada, even here in BC. So Do you have any information on how people or what people could do to advocate for helping to increase the amount of vaccine supply in India?
Well, okay, one thing to keep in mind is I think AstraZeneca in Canada and America is a huge problem because it's been banned basically, like there's a halt on them, and I think there are 250,000 AstraZeneca vaccines just sitting in refrigerators in Ontario right now, which makes no sense. Like, what are we doing with those? Like, people, I still haven't even had my first dose of vaccines yet. Like, what are we doing? Like, there are people even in Canada that have not even received their first dose. Meanwhile, Ontario is just sitting over there with 250,000 vaccines. So that is frustrating. So I feel at that point, just send it. Just send those vaccines to India. Don't keep them. I understand that there are blood clot concerns and that you don't want to give AstraZeneca to Canadians. That's understandable. But don't hoard the vaccines either. Just send them back to whatever country needs them because it's not been banned in India. India is giving AstraZeneca to every person of every age. So you might as well just send it back. That's one thing. Again, getting in touch with the government, signing petitions that say that please send these vaccines back or make sure that they're used for second doses really quickly. That's one thing. Also, India is producing its own vaccines, right? It's in fact made more vaccines than any other country has in the whole world. Problem is that it needs raw material. It needs supplies, which are primarily in the US and Canada. So then asking the governments to release those supplies, lift those embargoes. So that's another thing. I think a lot of it is activism in the sense that you do need to talk to people in the government. There isn't that much that regular people can do about the vaccine supply. It's unfortunately up to the government. So the only thing that we could do is put some pressure on them.
I just wanted to switch gears just a little bit and just curious as we're mentioning, celebrating Asian Heritage Month and we're wanting to really recognize the achievements and contributions of those, Canadian descent and what they've done to contribute to the history of Canada. So are there any specific events, activities, ideas, suggestions that you could share with us, Shibani, that we could do to really honor them?
Well, yeah, I think one very easy way to do it for anyone sitting at home is to read books by Asian authors. You can just, Google like bestseller lists, New York Times bestseller Asian authors and find them even if they're older. You can read those. Another thing is to watch some shows maybe that are made by Asians. Minari is an Oscar-winning movie that was released recently, and it's about an immigrant Asian family that moved. I think it was the best foreign feature film at the Oscars this year. An immigrant family that moved to the U.S. It's a beautiful film. It's a gorgeous representation of what it's like for Asians to immigrate. And I think that's something that people can watch to celebrate Asians. Another Canadian show, it's a CBC show that airs on Netflix is Kim's Convenience. It's just a funny comedy about like an Asian family and how they're sort of surviving in Toronto, what they have to do, like do they face discrimination, how they deal with racism, stuff like that. And it's lighthearted, but it's on the nose still. You can still tell that, they're still going through something. And I think it's really nice. And it's a Canadian-made show. So that's definitely something that I would recommend. Right now, because of the pandemic, there's not a lot that you can do outside. Otherwise, I would say that you can sort of try to meet or like attend Asian events. But, right now that's tough. So I would say the easiest thing right now to do is to read some books by Asian authors and to watch movies or shows that are made by Asians or that are about Asians to try and understand their point of view.
Yeah, Bonnie Henry mentioned that, that they were starting to do the startup plan again for BC and what it's going to look like. And she was talking briefly about the religious centers and stuff, and that I gather it's, reasonable amount of people can be welcomed into physical space again. And I mean, everybody's got a different idea of what reasonable amount of people would be. And you mentioned earlier about how Surrey is, such a big main hub of a pretty dense East Indian population. And so relative to that, for attending, and you said they like to stay in their own bubble as well. So for those of us that aren't of East Indian descent, would they feel, would people attending there that are in that bubble feel offended or imposed upon if we were to go and explore their churches?
Oh, no, I think they're super welcoming. I think they want people to come, especially, I can't really speak for the East Indian community. I would say that East Indians, like Asians, are mostly based in Richmond. Surrey is more where the South Asians are, like Indians, Pakistani, Bangladeshis, they're most in Surrey. And I think the Asian community is more based in Richmond. But I wouldn't really say that they would be offended. I think one easy way to sort of assimilate is to just go to restaurants. Some of the best Indian restaurants in BC are in Surrey. Some of the best Asian restaurants in all of BC are in Richmond. So I would say the easiest way to sort of interact with the community is to talk to them, is to go to their restaurants. And you're also giving them business, right? You're also giving them some sort of financial profitability from doing that. And they're super welcoming, especially if like you're paying them in any form, then of course like, they're not going to turn down any business. No one is. So of course, like I think that's a great way to celebrate Asian heritage, South Asian or, East Asian, is to just go to their restaurants. And Asians and Indians are typically like, they love food. Asians and Indians, like they have such a big relationship to food. Like we define our day by what we eat almost sometimes. Like that's how much our life revolves around food and spices and stuff like that. So I think that's one really easy way to connect with the communities through food. For example, if you go to an Asian restaurant, you try some soba noodles or something, then the next time you meet an Asian person, you can be like, I love soba noodles. And, they know that you tried something, which I think also gives you connectivity points. It gives you something to talk about with people from those communities, is if you experience their culture and their food.
What about music?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I feel like with Indian music, at least, I'm not super familiar with Asian music. I know K-pop is really big. Like I know a lot of youngsters are into K-pop. I do think that there's a huge language barrier when it comes to Indian music, at least, because all of the music is, in regional languages, and India has 36 languages. So I myself only speak 3 Indian languages. So I don't even know what 33 of those music people are talking about myself. So I think it is a little harder to integrate into the music scene. But, if you like just listening without understanding the lyrics, then, you should definitely explore like Bollywood music or K-pop and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just such a beautiful reminder because, that's the one, not just the one thing, but we all have in common. It doesn't matter our race, our nationality, where we're from. It's food, it's family, it's music, it's celebration. We all look to celebrate that. It's important for all of us. It doesn't matter, what type of culture we come from. I mean, those are the mainstays of, and even even if you have a North American diet, maybe, you're eating hamburgers and French fries all day long and you're defining your day by eating the junk food. I mean, it still comes down to food, right? It just,
for sure.
We all want to nurture that part of ourselves, and family is the most important thread. We all want to be loved. We all want to share love, and through food is definitely a way that we share that. I recall back when I was in my 20s, I went to a party in West Vancouver, and it happened to be an East Indian family that was hosting it. And the woman was, oh my goodness, she must have spent weeks preparing all of this food. And I needed to leave. She would not let me leave that house without my own supply. I'm sure a month's worth supply of samosas. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah.
I fell in love with it, and I've been hooked ever since. But and then many years ago, I used to have a business over in Vancouver, and the majority of my clients were from the East Indian community in Surrey. And there was not one time I went into a house that I was not welcomed to tea and to food and to their family. And, it was just so gracious. And we should all aspire to that level of welcoming,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is kindness. There's an emphasis on, I don't know whether it's Kindness Week or Kindness Month, but I've seen a few news blurbs. Remember to be kind. Remember to exhibit kindness. So that tradition is one way of doing that. And it's also a way of addressing, just changing the tempo and the atmosphere. When there was so much hateful language going on with the previous person holding the White House hostage, language got really ugly. But as more people radiate and speak kindness to each other, do random acts of kindness. There's a website for random acts of kindness where people can just report in things that they do. It changes the tempo and changes the atmosphere. So you have encouraged us to do that today and to be more mindful of the principle that deals with bullying. You know, we have a month or a time that the station talks about 16 ways to stop bullying, and it is being that person that says stop, or that records, or that steps in, or makes a noise that changes what another person is doing.
For sure. I definitely agree. Another thing that, we've been seeing is like a lot of retail workers are being harassed. Now, they may or may not be people of color, but like if they tell you to wear a mask, then people are getting really offended. They're yelling at them. That's another thing. Like, they're just doing their jobs. So that's so other people stepping in often, helps to de-escalate the situation a little bit. So I do think getting involved is good. Of course, you should always be mindful of your own safety.
Yeah.
I would never encourage you to put yourself in harm's way, but I do think like saying something, recording, it does make a big difference.
And that's so true, Charlotte just mentioned about is the wording that we use and how we use that wording and how we express ourselves. And because it's I know that's been one of my challenges through this whole situation with COVID is I didn't realize how much of a rules person I was until this all went down, and so it's finding that space to think, well, you know what, maybe their habit isn't to walk down the aisle and notice that the arrows are going a certain way, and we all,
right.
So I've been testing the water, finding some days I'm more successful in finding a polite and pleasant way to just gently say to somebody, would you be okay if you went this direction? As opposed to, feeling the intensity in my mind, thinking, oh my goodness, you're going the wrong way, So it's just noticing that and figuring out a way to be, responsive, not reactive, lessen the judgment, be kinder, and having some grace and understanding. Like, we're all used to our habits. We're all used to doing things a certain way. This has stopped us all in our tracks. We're all learning as we go along. And like Bonnie Henry keeps reminding us as well, saying words that Charlotte said, just be kind, be compassionate, and, maybe we just need to take a breath every once in a while and hold the space.
Take a breath.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Shibani, for coming today and bringing that new insight to us, giving us more information about reasons we should welcome people from India as well as Japan, all of the parts, the broad area that has people of Asian, East Asian descent, and that we can just commonly look at customs like having food, inviting people to tea, sharing, that these are things that are really good when people cross-culturally share customs that they have. And as some of you mentioned, you've gone across the country and experienced these things. It's wonderful that we can experience them right here within our podcast group and right here across Vancouver. Speaking of that, next week, we're going to be looking at the milestones that we've made. When the podcast began a year ago, well, it was a little bit more than a year ago, but there were 20 topics that people wanted to address. One of them was housing, accessibility, food sources. We want you to bring an icon, bring something next week that is symbolic of a way that you think that you have seen the notion of older people in Vancouver change. And we're going to look at some of the topics and issues we talked to, and then look at where do we go next. So we'll be inviting people in who are using those things so that we can turn up the tempo. What are the areas where people are still seeing an powerless image of older people, and what are ways that we can radiate things like Neil's book, the cave writing, the new cave writing. What does the new cave writing on the wall look like? So those are things next week as the first Thursday in June. We'll be jumping off into June with that. So remember to bring something, invite a friend to come along. We're also building up our group, and we're going to be, the 411 Center will be rolling out services that people will be able to come to the building and get. So thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, Nancy, for being a facilitator today. And everyone, you could give a clap if you enjoyed this program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to say it's such a great initiative, and I'm so happy to see that, everyone wants to stay on top of technology. It's really great to hear that, and this is a really good conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shibani. Take good care.